it is important not to conflate critics of the CCP being wrong about their pushing for conflict with the CCP and risking a conflagration, that is, World War III. Now, yes, it's wrong to do that, but there should not be a conflating that with claims that, well, therefore, they're wrong about everything in terms of their criticism of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Such a conflating would be committing a critical thinking error known as ad hom. That is, they're saying, well, because they're wrong about this, then they must be wrong about everything on that subject matter, which is, of course, not necessarily true. I think that they could still be correct on other matters in terms of their criticism of the CCP, namely the claims about the mistreatment of the Uyghur people and the Tibetan people of China. And I think that those claims may very well be correct, even though they're wrong to engage in such things as the Pelosi saying she's planning to fly to Taiwan at this time, which would be a very irresponsible and reckless move, I believe. We should not be risking World War III against a nuclear power nation such as China at these times of high tension. It'd be like trying to using a candle to find your way around a dynamite factory. It's not a responsible thing to do. It's reckless. But it still can be true that the CCP is mistreating the Uyghur peoples and the Tibetan peoples, and I think it's undoubtedly true that they have been engaging in draconian measures with their lockdowns in various Chinese cities. That has been empirically proven to be true, that they are being authoritarian, very authoritarian with their lockdowns in Shanghai and other cities around China. And that's because the CCP is the Chinese Communist Party, and like basically all communist parties, past and present, they're based on the principles of Marxism. And with Marxism, there is no recognition of overall inalienable rights in terms of freedom of the individual. The Marxism is based on the principles of Hegel. And Hegel was all about history, the march of history. Now Hegel did not really make a lot of sense to me. It never rang true. And reading Hegel and reading about Hegel, I'm left wondering, I think to myself, where is he coming up with this stuff? It's all synthetic a priori. And no, I'm not necessarily saying all synthetic a priori doesn't make sense. I think that you can sort of rely on the sixth sense, like that is intuition, about in terms of synthetic a priori. So maybe it's not really synthetic. It's it is synthetic, but it's not necessarily a priori. It can be a posteriori. In terms of the sixth sense, so it is sensed. You can come to your sense of intuition about the truthiness of any given premise, but that intuition sense does not is not ringing true in terms of the philosophy of Hegel, and in turn Marx also, since Marxism, Marx based his philosophy on the philosophy of Hegel, and I think I'm thinking of Hegel as being more like a religion that has no ring of truth to me. It just seems like a whole lot of fiction, and not very entertaining fiction at that. It's more like an insomnia cure type of fiction, and rather puzzling. So but primarily in context of this discussion, the central premise of Hegel in relation to and Marx is in terms of the march of history, based on this principle of the dialectical. In the case of Marx, it's dialectical materialism, I believe, where there's this thesis, antithesis, synthesis, problem, reaction, solution. And with Marx, the problem is the bourgeois class, the bourgeoisie class, and then I guess the reaction to that is the rising up of the working class, the proletariat, against the bourgeois class, and that's the reaction. And solution is this. Eventually, I guess it would be. I'm not really sure. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. That's the whole thing with Marxism. But either way, it's this whole overall march of history. That's what Marxism and Hegelianism is all about. But it's not about these individuals. They have no. For each individual, there's no spiritual importance given to the individual in terms of this march of history. The individual is just a cog. They're just a pawn in this dialectical march of history with Marx and Hegel. They don't matter to them. And that's what people don't seem to realize with Marxism. It's this the progressive ideas of Marxism seems to be just there to draw in these people with these progressive ideals. But it is not what Marxism is fundamentally about. It's more like a cult, I think of it as. So just like with any other cult, where people might be drawn in by, say, a sense of belonging, sense of family, even free love. But it's not what the cult is all about fundamentally. It's just, though there are certain psychological lures that are used to draw the members into that cult. And I think the psychological lure in terms of Marxism are these progressive ideals that are thrown out there about the rights of the workers. But the fundamental philosophy of Marxism has no regard for any individual rights. The whole fundamental philosophy is about using those individuals to achieve this destiny that Hegel and Marx saw as what needs to happen to achieve that destiny in history. This synthesis of keeping on through history of this dialectical whatever that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't ring true to me, and I don't think it would rings true to the common everyday proletariat worker, the working class. They don't care about this dialectical materialism thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They just want to be able to live their lives, and they would naturally think of themselves as important as individual spiritual beings, which they are. But Hegel and Marx had no regard for the individual as an important spiritual being. They don't care, Hegel and Marx, about the individual. The individual is just a cog in this machinery of history that is their cult, that is their religion. They only care about the historical dialectic, the movement of history. That's all that Hegel and Marx care about. It's their religion. It's their cult. They don't care about the individual. And that's why when you see through Marxist Communist Parties, such as the Soviet Union, in the Soviet bloc countries, and now in the CCP, where there's no regard for the individual, because those communist parties, they're based on the principle of Marxism, and Marxism is based on the principles of Hegel, and in those philosophies there is no regard for the individual as an important spiritual special being. The individuals only matter as cogs in the machinery of the movement of history itself. So that's what needs to be understood. And so that when we see these lockdowns and all these draconian measures that the Chinese government is taking against the people, and you wonder, well, why are they having no regards for these individuals? Well, that's because Marxism has no regard for the individual as an important special spiritual being. And then I wish more people would watch. There's a lot of good channels on YouTube that are critical of the CCP, and they have video evidence of these draconian measures that they are taking in terms of lockdowns and restrictions that's ongoing currently, and it's only getting worse. And so people can see what is going on in China and what the CCP is all about. That they don't care about the individual. At least here in the United States, we do have a Bill of Rights. It's not followed as closely as it should be, but it is certainly better than nothing, which is what you have in a place like China currently with the CCP, and what you saw back in the Soviet Union. There was no Bill of Rights, and you had the forced labor camps, and the disregard of the privacy of individuals, especially like in the East Germany, part of the Soviet bloc, where one of every 3 citizens was a spy for the Communist Party, to keep tabs. So you'll be all sorts of friends and relatives were spying on their other friends and relatives. One in every 3 were a spy, an official spy of the Communist Party in former East Germany. So because the Communist Party is based on the principles of Marxism. Marxism is based on the principles of Hegel, and there is no regard for the individual as a special spiritual being in I'll call it the cult of Hegel and Marx. That needs to be understood. So when we see, like, looking back at the history of the Soviet Union with these forced labor camps, at the time, say here in the West, in the United States, there was some people calling the alarm of the the atrocities of these forced labor camps, also known as the Gulags. But there was a lot of, on the left, they glossed over it and dismissed these claims as false. But of course later on they proved to be true. It was horrible what went on over in the gulags of the Soviet Union under Stalin, and even a member of FDR's administration, Henry Wallace. I can't remember. He was either the vice president or important member of the cabinet of FDR's presidency at the time. Henry Wallace went over to the Soviet Union to visit one of those forced labor camp, Gulag camps, and what the Soviets did, they just set up a Potemkin village labor camp, so that it made it look like it was not so bad, actually downright pleasant. So they led Henry Wallace down this primrose path, making it seem like, oh yeah, these are fine, there's no big deal, these are rather, it's like a resort. And so Wallace came back and he reported, oh yeah, they're not bad, no problem, but it was all a lie. And the same thing could well be going on today, and I suspect it is, regarding the Uyghur people in China, or the CCP, where there is no freedom of the press. I think they are continuing to hide what is going on with their civil re-education camps of the Uyghur people, and the nature of those camps. It's just a continuation of this Marxist Communist Party tradition of mistreatment of individuals, and that do not fall in line, that are not properly behaving cogs in their machinery of history. And it's like, in this Marxist ideology that is a cult, there's no reflection on how it's turned out to be. It's all turned out to be a big lie. It's all false regarding what Marx had to say, because you can see that right there with the CCP, where it's become the point where it's now the bureaucratic class has taken the place of the bourgeoisie class. So now that if you see some of these, when I was watching some of these videos of these critical of the CCP China on YouTube, seeing that it's clear that yes, the bureaucratic class is now the bourgeois class. They are now the master, and the slave are the rest of the plebs that are not part of the Chinese Communist Party. They've completely substituted the bureaucratic class, the Chinese Communist Party members, with the bourgeois class that Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto. But there's no recognition, no acknowledgement of what has actually happened. And at least in the Soviet Union, there was the claim that, oh, eventually we're going to get rid of the bureaucrats, and then everything will be all good. We just have to be patient. Eventually we'll get to that point where no more bureaucracy. But that does not seem to be discussed anymore, even in the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, in China. They just kind of forgot about that. So it's just like a perpetual bureaucratic class is now the dominant masters, and there's no potential. There's no hope of achieving that, where everybody's in harmony now, and there's no more bureaucrats. There's no more regular citizens. that have to answer to the bureaucrats. Now it's the bureaucrats, the masters, and then the ordinary plebs that are not part of the Chinese Communist Party, not members of the Chinese Communist Party. They're now they are the slaves. They're reporting to the master bureaucrats of the Chinese Communist Party members. But this is a cult. They don't engage in reflection in such matters, that the Marxism has clearly failed in the form of the CCP has shown, it's become manifest, the failure of Marxism. But that's how cults work. They don't reflect on such matters. They don't think, oh well, maybe we were wrong all about this. Maybe Marxism is wrong. Our founding philosophy, it's all a big sham. But they're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. But no, I don't think we should be risking World War III over Taiwan. But at the same time, it's important to engage in criticism of the political philosophies that are flawed, and we need to point out those flaws, and so that we can come up with a more ideal political philosophy, while at the same time protecting what is correct, what is the good parts of our own social political system, especially something like our Bill of Rights, that protect the rights of the individual and recognizes the individual, as every individual, as being a special and important spiritual being, and protects their rights, their inalienable rights. And that's what the Bill of Rights do, and we need to protect those Bill of Rights and reinforce them and strengthen them, and hopefully others around the world and in turn can recognize that and implement their own protection of the rights and recognition of the individual as an important special spiritual being. So that's my point for this video. And if you're watching and listening, thanks for watching and listening.